all the better practice. Bless their middle school hearts, but my goodness, they can be a mess sometimes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate, especially what you were saying about kind of getting to the heart of people's intentions and kind of trying to, specifically talking about like flipping that into potentially a positive experience for them and their engagement with the community. And I think so much of what you're describing is relevant when you're talking about kind of where you start, right? And I think this specifically to our target audience, people who could be at any stage of the game development process, like really formulating or creating the identity of your community. And we've talked about that in a lot of ways previously, but I think specifically kind of on the front of establishing standards, like what are the expectations that you have for people who are going to be engaging with you. Can you share kind of what your approach would be to that?
Yeah. I mean, that is probably one of the number one things I've learned is just critical for setting up the tone and the atmosphere that you want in a community, that any community that you're in, is that you set clear expectations. We've done, in our Discord, on our stream, kind of any place our community is, that is posted somewhere where it's easily accessible. People can refer to it. We can refer back to it, just so that everyone knows how we expect folks to behave. And what's really nice, and this is something that, our community at Rose City is still growing. We're still a pretty small indie studio. And so we're still facilitating this. But what's really cool is that we're starting to see people, like if someone comes in and maybe says something that's not of the character of what we hope to facilitate, I've seen people say, hey, we don't do that here. And it's a really lovely way of just kind of letting folks know of what's expected of them without making them feel like called out, because maybe they don't know because they haven't been here before. And that's something that we do try to model in our online spaces as well as in like physical IRL spaces. Whenever we go to events, we always try as like a team also model the kind of like kindness that we see. And also because like we're all really nice people in person. So it's not like we're doing this intentionally in that way, but we all do try to make sure people know that we're a studio that encourages others, that we are kind to each other, and we expect, people from our team to be kind to others. And it's something that we hope just kind of like pervades the whole culture of the studio and like kind of goes out from there, which has been really nice. I think that's something people seem to feel, and I think we've had a few comments on that as well from people at events, is like it's just kind of this vibe that it's not just from the rules in our community, but like we're trying to live by them as well ourselves. Right.
Yeah, and I think on a fundamental level, right, like what could you possibly have to lose by setting the expectations that in all of the spaces that you're in, people are behaving positively, right? I mean, you probably enjoy being around people, the communities that you're in, they thrive not just off of the fact that maybe you don't have things that are blatantly turning people off, but also that it's an inviting environment that's probably a lot more pleasant for you too.
Right. It's like, it's like for me in particular, and everyone else at our studio, but it's like this being a part of the community is my job. And so I would like it to be a space that I am excited to go to every day or excited to check in on and say hi to folks. And if I'm not excited to be there, then that's not good.
Right. So, it won't necessarily carry over. If you're not excited, then chances are your community might not be excited, and that could lead to potential, unhealthy behaviors down the road too. So it speaks a lot where what your expectations are too, I would say, when going into it. Like you said, I got to be happy going into it too, because whatever your feelings are could potentially, carry over into the rest of the community.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now, with this in mind, and we know that the need for this exists everywhere, but given our focus, specifically, like what would you say are some of the key differences or areas of emphasis for indie studios as opposed to the alternative?
I think, I mean, one of the benefits being an indie studio is that I think it allows us to have a more personal connection with folks. The scale is just like the biggest difference between an indie studio and like even a double A or triple A, where there's a lot more people who know about the brand, who know about the games. And being a smaller studio, there is this level of sort of personal connection and like humanization that can happen. Whereas like most everyone in the Rose City Discord who participates in the community knows, they know who I am, and I recognize the people who frequent the Discord. I recognize all of them. Same with like the streams. We have regulars now who come into the streams. And I think with a larger scale or a bigger scale team and a bigger scale audience, that becomes more and more difficult. It's not impossible. I've seen some really great community teams at huge studios. But there's this level of like, again, personal connection and humanity that happens with an indie studio. I think key difference for indies, I think there's a sort of it's a slower burn. And I think this, again, depends on the games that a studio releases, the communities that happen along with the games. But versus like us releasing something and having like lots and lots and lots of people all of a sudden follow the team in the game. Sorry, you may hear a plane behind me. There's a lot, it's a slower burn in terms of getting to know folks, getting them engaged with our studio, and taking the time to get to know them as people, versus maybe I would think maybe a larger studio that if they already have, like if Naughty Dog, for example, released a new IP, that community probably would grow fairly quickly compared to if we released a new title. So yeah. I think the scale in terms of time as well as just size does make for some pretty big differences.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Yeah, well, that was precisely what we were looking for. So thank you very much for that answer. Now, we did kind of talk a little bit about how, what some of the difficulties that might arise, like what that looks like. Really kind of looking at, the approach to problem solving, like how to come to a resolution when you encounter these sorts of difficulties with potentially like disgruntled community members. What would you say is typically your approach? I know you kind of started to outline that a little bit before.
Yeah, I think this is definitely going to evolve. Like I've already seen it start to evolve a little bit more as our community has started to grow. My ultimate goal would be to create a community that I want them to want me, but I also want them to not need me, if that makes any sense.
No, totally.
To have a community, like the ultimate goal, I think, for a community developer, community manager, would be to have a community that is so in tune with sort of the cultural norms and values of the studio, and they all sort of have a way to get to know each other easily, and like you don't necessarily need to be there for that community to thrive. That's like the number one holy grail like goal, I would think, for at least myself, but for a lot of community managers I've talked to. So right now, the challenge, I would say, is finding that balance in being super engaged and involved as a community developer, but also trying to find ways to let folks know that they're empowered, like this is their space, and they can use it to interact with one another, not necessarily just use it to interact with the studio. So I think that's my personal current challenge that I'm working through and trying to facilitate as much as I can.
So in some ways, and I don't mean to like downplay this or oversimplify it, but you're saying your main approach is looking for kind of in some ways, not in 100%, but a self-managed community, which it sounds like you're well on the path to doing as well, correct?
Yeah, in some ways. I think they're absolutely... I think a community, I don't want to talk myself out of a job. But,
right, of course.
But yeah, I think...
it still needs a leader, regardless.
Exactly. I think the community developer or anyone who's a community, like sort of person with a studio, they're there to help facilitate what's happening at the studio with the people who are playing the game. And so I think there will always be a need, like you said, someone to lead this process, someone to kind of help keep sort of the head on the body, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And there are instances, like, I do believe that as a community developer for the studio, if I see something happening, like, it is my job to step in at a certain point and like either tell someone to knock it off or pull them aside, maybe in a DM to ask what's going on, and kind of be like the teacher or the parent. But as I feel like a lot of parents who have multiple kids would say, it's like, it's really good when they learn how to like problem solve with one another,
right? Yeah.
versus having like a parent always come in. And so that is a goal.
No,
for sure.
I'm curious now, in light of what you just said, do you have some type of like your own standard or rules where if you do have to kind of like take someone aside, DM them or whatever, is it like a 3-strike rule? Or, I mean, and you don't have to go into great detail or anything, but like, what are your standards? What are your thresholds in terms of when it gets down to something like, do you just eliminate them on the spot, or do you try to work with them? Because you did mention too how it's also great to sometimes those disgruntled members could provide an opportunity where you're turning them in potentially maybe a super fan too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, and it becomes kind of, as much as I hate to, a little bit of a case-by-case basis, but there are certain things that no matter what, if this happens, like, you are going to be kicked. Things like harassment, like hateful comments based on, gender or sexual orientation or anything of that nature. People who are posting like not safe for work things like that are, again, and this is where it becomes so important to have those clear expectations in your like community guidelines. We have specifics listed where if you do one of these things, that's an instant out. There are other times, and I think this is more often the case, where people may toe that line of perhaps they're not necessarily saying mean to anyone in particular, but they're just being very, very negative, and kind of, you can tell when a community member is maybe bringing sort of the atmosphere down and sort of sharing things that are just, that aren't conducive to a community atmosphere. And sometimes this can be easily fixed by me or a moderator. I haven't mentioned, but we have like great moderators, which I think are really important for any community to have. Just reaching out and saying, hey, just want to check in. You've been here and you seem like something's kind of bothering you. Are you okay? Sometimes just even asking that can clear up so much. And I would say from my personal experience, a lot of the time that can help, because sometimes people don't even realize what they're doing maybe is reading as something negative towards other members of the community. At other times, you kind of have to say, hey, this is your first warning. I would love for you to still be a part of this community. Could you please change your behavior? And I've had instances where sometimes the person says, yes, sorry, did not realize, and they're totally fine. And I've had a couple of instances where people just kind of keep pushing the buttons, and you just have to say, I'm sorry, but you've been provided with a warning. This is it.
Yeah, and I love that approach that you take initially first too, is like you go and it sounds like you're being very empathetic on like, hey, there might be a lot going on that we don't know, and it's kind of affecting their behavior. But then there's also, the fact that you're going in and saying, hey, look, I still want you to be here, but these things need to change in order for that to happen. So it's not like you're just, booting them out right away type of stuff. Because some people out there, I think, have that. They're like, I don't want to deal with it. You're done. But I think that's probably one of the best approaches to take. You're still welcoming of them, and you're just trying to like steer them in the right direction. It sounds like that works out really well with you guys, because you said most cases people are like, oh, I didn't realize that, or you know what, you're right, and sorry, and then they just change their behavior, and then all for a better and healthier community.
Yeah, I think, and it really depends on also the community developer's style. Like, I think and also their preferences for, say, like privacy, because like I am very okay with like DMing folks and kind of introducing, like, if especially what's perhaps sometimes a little awkward is if they're maybe a little newer to the community, so I haven't established any rapport with them, and so it can be a little bit weird for folks to maybe get a DM from this person,